Welcome to today's episode of the Green Industry Podcast. Our special guest today is Joshua Gillow. He is up in Pennsylvania and has experience in the outdoor spaces, swimming pools, and beautiful backyards and all of that. Been on the program before, and I met you once in person at Equip Expo. You were in your booth back there. I don't know if you remember that, but welcome back to the show, Joshua.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, I do remember that very clearly. And it was great to meet you there. And I'm excited to share some stuff today with your listeners.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's get right into it. You often talk about this premium sales experience for a customer. And a lot of my customers, Joshua, are just mowing, edging, trimming, blowing, and doing, $75 a pop service.
Yep.
You're used to doing jobs north of 10,000 and way beyond for these luxurious backyards. But what is that premium sales experience, and how can that even work with somebody doing something as simple as a mow, edge, trim, and blow weekly lawn mowing program?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And the cool thing is about the sales fundamentals of good customer service and all that are, they work across whether you're selling $75 mow and blows or whether you're doing $250 to $500 to $1 million projects. It really makes a difference. The core principles are the same. So what I mean by that is, in today's economy, with as much uncertainty as we're seeing out there right now, customers they're holding back. There's markets that are doing really well and others that are not doing well at all. Some guys that are used to being really, really booked out and having tons of backlog aren't having it this year. This year is a different kind of year. And the biggest reason for that, regardless of the market you're in, is because of the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty in your buyers. And if there's uncertainty, that doesn't lead to making decisions. That typically leads to a stagnated idea or them not making a decision or holding off until times are better, where there's more certainty in the market. So as sales professionals, whether you're rolling out $75 projects or whether you're doing $750,000 projects, the goal is to make sure that you can add value every moment you possibly can. And what I mean by that is there's so many ways you can do that, even on a small scale. Adding value could be as simple, Paul, it can be as simple as returning a phone call and getting back to a client quickly, right? I know how busy it is out there. I've been in this industry now 30 years, starting out with mulching and cleaning up riverbanks, along the Delaware River for cash. The interesting part is, what I found over all this time is that if you consistently put your client first, not the revenue, but the relationship first. Think about how you would want to be treated. How would your wife want to be treated? How would your husband want to be treated? Like getting down to the nitty-gritties of the actual relationship. That's what matters. So something you can do regardless of the scale of the project is to make sure that you're taking care of your customer, answering your phones, getting back to them, giving them what they need to make a great decision. Because, Paul, we aren't a great fit for every single customer. Listeners out there, you're not the only one, and that's the good thing. It's good because your customers have choices, and you should earn their business based on the value that you're providing, not the fact that you're the cheapest price, because the cheapest price tends to be the guy that's out of business first. So what's important is that we're adding value by returning those phone calls, by being a man or a woman of your word, of going out there and truly offering the highest level service you possibly can. And if your customers can feel, not just see, but feel that you care, that you're willing to go the extra mile for them, they're going to stick around. Price isn't the main focus right then and there. They want to be taken care of. They want someone who truly understands their problem and is willing to come in and give them the best solution to do that. But you have to understand the problem first. Now, simple thing like mow and blows is like, hey, not that big a deal. But for some customers, there's a very much a specific way that they want it done, or they prefer it to be done. And if you can manage that and you can offer that and give them that white glove service each and every time, the chance of them moving on, if your prices go up, is less.
Yeah, that's good. What's your rule of thumb with communication? You talk about returning the phone calls. We get a lot of emails, a lot of texts, a lot of phone calls throughout the day, and probably preoccupied serving another customer. Do you have a rule of thumb of like how much time needs to go by until you return a text, return a phone call, return an email?
That's a great question. And this is all about boundaries, right? As a professional, we have to look at ourselves as that, not just the guy that mows the lawn or the guy that weed whacks, the guy that, mulches flower beds or trims things. We have to look at ourselves as professionals, because we are. And then, okay, what do professionals do? Well, professionals work from X to Y time. They don't have their phone on 24 hours a day, taking texts and phone calls and emails and all that stuff and responding. They may say, hey, I'm available from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. or fill in the blank. It could be 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., whatever it might be for you. But having guardrails, if you will, on your schedule, because clients are very much like dogs when it comes, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that in a way that you train them based on how you respond or react to whatever any type of stimulus they send into you. So say, for instance, it's a text and it's 10 o'clock at night and you're just heading to bed and you see Mrs. Jones sends a text in about something about her petunias in the front yard and don't mow them over tomorrow, or I planted new bulbs here or something like that. And you respond at 10 o'clock at night because you just want to get it done. What do you think Mrs. Jones is thinking? Right? Mrs. Jones is thinking, wow, this guy's always available. Amazing. So the next time she sends another text out at 9:30 at night and you answer again, well, pretty soon she gets trained at a point where you respond whenever she actually sends you a text. But then you have a couple of family events or something that come up and you don't respond to her. And then she starts thinking, well, maybe he doesn't care anymore at 9 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night. So think about it. We have to set guardrails and boundaries on when we respond to things, because they can send them whenever they want. I've had clients send me texts at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, because they're getting home from work. And there's a text. If you respond at that moment, you're opening yourself up for that kind of a relationship. But if you waited until 7, 8, 9 o'clock the next morning and then responded, they'll realize that you're not going to respond overnight. Maybe they didn't even want you to, right? So it's about what I want to get to, Paul, is the idea that you really have to set boundaries for your schedule, and you have to make sure you're training your clients into what's acceptable and what's unacceptable when it comes to communication.
Now, what's the timeline though? Because like before we just hopped on this podcast interview, I got a very important email, and it's like, do I need to reply by the end of business today, or do I need to reply by tomorrow morning, or 24 hours, or like what's with a phone call, a text, an email? What do you think the limit is to where it's like, I got to get it back to them at least by this time?
So much of that is determined by the type of call or email or text that came in, right? If it's an extreme example, but if somebody's hurt, then you obviously want to get back to them quickly. If it's something that can wait, most of the stuff that comes up, most of the fires that we manage as outdoor living professionals, that they're fires in the client's mind, perhaps, but they aren't going to. No one's going to get hurt. Nothing's big is going to happen if they wait an hour, 2 hours, 5 hours a day. Right? Our goal is to make sure our clients know that we care by being there to answer their questions, but it doesn't mean that it has to be instantaneous. It can be half hour, 5 hours a day. As long as you get back within 24 hours, you're usually in pretty good shape. But if you have something that's, the water is shooting out of the backyard, someone hid an irrigation head and it's just blowing all over the place and it needs to be shut off and they don't know what to do, that might be something you want to field pretty quick. But most things that we deal with are not ridiculous fires that must be put out right now. Clients may want you to think they are, but again, what kind of boundaries are you willing to put on your life? Because if you don't put boundaries, your clients will put boundaries on you, and you're gonna absorb their boundaries, which are probably not going to be the same as your same principles that you are guided by. So what's important is that you set up those boundaries, that you understand what that means and when to engage and at what level. Always thinking, how do I serve this client to the highest level? And, you have to keep in mind as well, Paul, that, especially when it comes to bigger projects, a lot of clients have never gone through a process like this before. They might buy an outdoor living space once or twice in a lifetime. Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, then they're like, all right, well, if that's the case, they have a lot of uncertainty in this, transformation of their backyard or whatever it might be. So they're going to have a lot of questions, but it's a matter of setting up a framework and some boundaries.
When it comes to your experience in the outdoor space industry, revenue-wise, what was the biggest job that you guys ever did?
Biggest job we've done is right now it's close to 900 grand.
Ooh-wee. So
yeah, so that's what we're actually working on one right now that way, and that's with no swimming pool. It's just an outdoor living space. The pool's already there. So our average projects are somewhere around $250,000, but again, I started out with $1,000 projects, cleanups, and that kind of stuff. I never really got heavy into the mowing world. We did some snow removal, very little, but mostly went into design build and then design manage.
Okay. And all of that is in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, everything's in Pennsylvania.
What cities in Pennsylvania area?
Mostly Eastern Pennsylvania. So everything from the Lehigh Valley up through the Poconos down to Philadelphia. So mostly the eastern part.
Okay. What's the biggest mistake that you notice in the lawn care, landscaping, outdoor space industry when it comes to branding? I know you're very passionate about premium branding. What
Mhm.
mistakes are you seeing from this industry?
Well, I see some guys trying to be premium because they truly want to be, but they aren't providing a premium experience for the customer. So basically, their offer looks good and shiny and beautiful, but when a customer actually becomes part of that experience, it falls short because it looks good, it's shiny from the outside, but as soon as you open the car door, it falls off. You know what I mean? So that's one of the biggest things I see. It's the want. As professionals in this industry, we might want that experience because it'll drive more sales, high ticket customers that aren't so particular about every single nickel and dime. But at the same time, it takes a lot of bandwidth, a lot of systems and processes. It takes a lot of training inside the business to be able to deliver that 5-star experience for customers, especially when in our world, we're with a customer for 6 months to a year and a half, depending on the project.
Mhm.
So there's a constant opportunity for us to be able to deliver and also fail. And if everything looks beautiful, you got a beautiful website, you've got beautiful pictures, you've got beautiful trucks, you've got beautiful all kinds of things and flyers and all that, it's great. But as soon as the customer starts working with you, all of a sudden your team doesn't respond to phone calls or emails in a timely manner. You're starting to have a lot of things falling in the cracks, or expectations. The huge ones, Paul, is expectations, regardless of the business size you're in. If your customer expects X and you deliver Y, then the customer is like, wait, there's a problem here. I didn't get what I thought I was going to get. The question we have to ask as professionals is, where are they getting the idea of what they're supposed to be given at the end, where that expectation was set. So if their expectation, let's say for a new patio, is $20,000 and your bid comes back at $30,000, we've got a delta there. So in their mind, it costs $20,000. My first question is, where did they get the $20,000 number from? Right? Is it from other quotes? Is it from their, I don't know, their uncle twice removed 22 years ago did a patio, and that happened to be the number that he said over dinner one time at Thanksgiving, and that's the number that's stuck in her head, and that's all there's going to be to it. So we don't know where they're coming from with this. We need to be able to become detectives and to unpack the case, unravel the case by asking great questions. When we ask great questions during our sales process, we get to open up a plethora of thoughts in their heads, and also get a better understanding of where they are right now. Like, if we can understand our prospects and put our feet in their shoes, see how they see the world, and get a sense of what we need to do to be able to help this client, then we have a much better perspective of how to help this client, and not just be, yeah, we can do that for you. No problem, Mrs. Jones. That's what everybody else said too. They said, no problem. You want a 12 by 16 patio? We can do that. Here's a bid for it. And then the contractors all get pissed when the cheapest bid wins, when that customer has been given 3 of the same options. And if you or I was given 3 of the exact same options, at least the way it looks, we'd probably pick the cheapest one. Why would you pay more for the same? But if we take our time and create a customer experience for our customers through a detailed proposal, through a great step-by-step process, the next thing you know, your customer's like, well, I felt something different from that company. And to them, that's worth more, because you're taking what they're paying us for, Paul, is to take whoever can take the most uncertainty out of the transaction and put the most certainty in place is the one who has the highest value to your customer. Right? When you leave a customer in uncertainty by, yeah, we'll kind of get there then, or this may be like this, or maybe some other changes, or they give them a proposal that says patio on it. And the next thing you know, the client's like, I don't know what else it includes. There's a lot of uncertainty there versus having a lot of detail, which helps customers make good informed choices.
That's good. Now, what's your experience of attracting the ideal customer? And have you ever done a job for what we call a PITA, a pain in the butt? And how do you avoid those? And how do you attract customers where it's a win-win? Your team is doing an excellent job, and the customers being reasonable, paying on time. It's a win-win. And maybe share a story and what you learned from it when you had a difficult customer, and what you learned from that experience as well.
Yeah, I mean, Paul, I could write books about customers in the early days that I just took on anything that came in the door. I thought out of 7 or 8 billion people at the time. That customer called me and I had to go out and, do the dance. I had to go out and meet with that customer. I had to give them a proposal, because what would they do? Right. They might write me a bad review. They might talk bad about me. So I had to go out there and meet with them. I had no way of pre-qualifying or screening clients or making sure we were going to be a good fit. I had none of that. So I was chasing each and every one of them. But what I realized over time is if I didn't know who was an ideal customer, exact detail of an ideal customer for my company, then how could I ever ask, God to send me the right people, right? If I'm not clear on who I can serve and our company can serve the best, then how do we know which ones are going to come in? And then we just start picking everybody that calls. So what we've learned over the time, as far as great customers, how to attract them, is to be very, very clear on who you're attracting. And then look at, if say you're listening right now and you're like, crap, I don't even know what's going on. I don't know my ideal client avatar. I don't know what they do for a living, what they do with their spare time, what their family dynamics like, what their hobbies are, what kind of cars they drive, where they live, what the value of their home is. If I don't know any of those things and I'm just out there hoping the phone rings, how can you possibly direct your marketing? Because we'll call it people group. Each type of people group, whether it's different financial levels or different size of their houses or location, they have certain threads or commonalities. And the way I like to tell our students to get ready for it is to think, who are the 3 clients that you can look back over the last year or 2 that you served that you're like, man, I wish I could just put them on the copy machine and just copy them and serve that same client over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
That customer paid on time. They loved your ideas. They were easy to work with. They were excited about the results, like all of that. If you could pick your top 3 clients that you would be like, man, I wish I could just copy them and just serve them constantly, who would they be? And then start looking for threads in there, right? Start looking for threads of commonalities. They're like, oh, well, look at that. They're all healthcare professionals. Interesting. Okay. Or they're all entrepreneurs, or they all work at Macy's. I mean, it doesn't matter where it is. The point is, what threads are we finding? What kind of cars do they drive? What do they do? If they go on vacation, where do they go? Is it somewhere in Europe? Is it somewhere in the Caribbean? Is it somewhere in Idaho? It doesn't matter. But the question is, where do they go? Are there any common threads there? Because once you get that information and you find that your ideal client avatar have these certain traits, then you can advertise to them and you can get into their heads and you can start thinking like, all right, what do those people need? Because I want more of them. I don't want the PIAs. I don't want the ones that don't pay on time. I don't want the ones that are constantly ungrateful, think their money is worth more than everybody else's. And now all of a sudden they want me to start 2 weeks early because they just think it's the right thing to do, right? We've all had those clients. I've got lists of clients like that in the past that I've dealt with. The way we got around that is by, first of all, diving into our client avatar, knowing exactly who we serve best. Because listeners, you're not going to serve everybody best. Just because they have a heartbeat and they can fog a mirror doesn't mean that they can be your customer, right? It has to be a win-win or there's no deal. And you have as much authority in that as they do. That's the cool part about this. But we have to first be very clear on who we want to serve and who we don't want to serve. So when it comes down to that, our goal is to be clear on who we can serve. And then if someone is coming into your company and they're asking for service and they're not going to be a good fit, for our world is a great example, Paul. For our world is, an average project $250,000. That's not normally a decision that either husband or wife is going to make on their own, fully on their own, right? This is a scenario where we need to have both decision makers. We finally get the very best results with both decision makers on board. So therefore, part of our process is to keep them together and having conversation through our discovery process and making sure we can hear from both of them, not just the husband or just the wife, because they're the ones in control of this project. And the reality is we know that both of them have a say in what's going on. So we have to make sure we're having that conversation with both of them, not just the one who talks the most or the one that's not as busy as the other one, because then that person is going back trying to sell these ideas to a husband or wife. And that's not nearly as effective to make sure they get the best result. Because at the end of the day, it's always about the result. So how do you get rid of the PIA side of things? You simply have a process in place that irons them out. A step-by-step process that you can tell pretty quickly whether this client's going to be a heck yes client or whether they're going to be a maybe someone else should serve you client.
When it comes to pricing, what's your advice to a small business owner, and how does that kind of help in this process of attracting your ideal customer?
So pricing, as far as there's so many levels to where we could go with this, but when it comes to pricing, I see a lot of guys that are like, look, I'm going to go on Facebook, one of the whatever forums that are on Facebook, one of the groups, and say, hey, how much are you charging per square foot on this? And how much are you charging per square foot on that? Right. That's how I started. I didn't know any different. We didn't have Facebook back then. You went to your distributor and you talked to somebody and you heard something, and then you're like, oh, maybe that would work here. It was a very quiet, very isolated world when I first started out in this business. And now it's completely changed. And thank God for that. A lot more collaboration, a lot more people sharing, a lot more of that stuff. But the problem is square foot pricing in our world, let's say in hardscaping with pavers or even square foot of mulching or whatever it might be, that might be a good indicator of what pricing around where it should be. But every company is different. Every single company has a different overhead structure. They have a different way they do business. And to say, hey, a square foot price here is going to be the same in my business is going to be the same as somebody else could use. It's not a great primer to make sure that you're making money, because it's most likely either too high or way too low. So that square foot price for you has to come from your actual numbers, your actual overhead, your actual way that you run a company. So when it comes to pricing, it's important to make sure you know your numbers. You have to know your numbers down to a point where you are extremely confident, because with clarity, knowing your numbers brings confidence, and confidence can move mountains. But we need to have clarity first. If you're just out there like I did in the very beginning, didn't know any different, which is kind of winging it. Back then for 15 or 20 bucks, you could have great pavers put down. So it was like, all right, well, if the industry average for my area is $15 to $20 per square foot, I'm going to stay like 17 or 18. Problem is, after a couple of years of doing that, not knowing any different, I was losing money. And I was like, wait a minute here. Why is that? Well, because I have 2 extra pieces of equipment that my competitors don't have, or I have expenses that they don't have, or vice versa. Maybe I'm too high and that's why I'm not getting the work. So if it's just a numbers game, you better know your numbers. But if you can take numbers, confidence and clarity around your numbers, knowing that you're right on and that you're exactly where you need to be for your company, that you can make not just a profit that you can take a paycheck home, but that your company's profiting too, has to be profiting, then you can then add on top of that the customer experience. And when you take the time to be even more engaged with your customers, building those relationships, especially long-term, especially the lawn care world, where you're going to be seeing these customers tons of times a year, hopefully years and years and years. It's not like us where we're in really intensely for a few months to a year and then gone. Like you guys are in it for a very long time. So building that relationship, getting them little gifts and little surprises that they wouldn't be expecting, things like that is what keeps you in the game with them, right? And then if you're building that relationship over time, then when you up your pricing to where it needs to be, they're going to be like, it's not about the numbers. I really want to make sure Paul keeps coming back to my house. I like that guy. He's a really good guy. He knows exactly what he's doing. His price might be a little higher, but I can trust him. He takes the uncertainty out of this relationship and puts certainty into it. And with that, that's worth more than just $10, $20 cheaper per mow or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. Just to give you a little context before I ask my next question, a lot of guys that listen to our program, I've met at Equip Expo or on the DMs, or they reply to my emails or whatever. So I've met a lot of folks, and there's several listeners who are solo and they don't want to add an employee. They're just, they got, they do fertilization, weed control, and they just got their route, or they do lawn care and they got their route, and they got their wife and they got their kids, and they go to baseball practice at night, and their life is so simple. They don't want to add more customers, add more employees. They don't want to do that. But then there's another group, which is a larger group, that they're solo, but they want to grow. But they don't know, can I afford my first employee? How am I going to pay them and me? And they're in this predicament of, I want to grow more revenue, more customers, but that's going to mean I hire my first employee, and they're scared. What's your advice to somebody who wants to get to that next level where they can go beyond just, they're maxed out and they're turning down work left and right, but they don't want to keep turning down that work? What's the wise way to move into that next category of business?
That's a great, very, very good question. And the first question you need to ask yourself is why? Why do you want to move into this next stage of business? What's the outcome? What's the result that you're looking for? Is it more revenue? Is it more freedom? Is it more significance in the market? You can be seen more places. Really, as a listener out there, and if this is on your heart, think about, why is that important to you? Because, regardless of the decision that you make, whether it is to bring somebody else in your team or still fly solo, there's going to be decisions to be made. There's going to be pain either way in business. That's just part of the game. That's part of our journey, right? Not many people will give up a 40-hour-a-week job with guaranteed benefits and pay to go out and put in 80 to 100 hours a week with no guarantee of anything, right? That's the nature of the entrepreneur. And that's why I love this world, because you can do and have and be whatever you want it to be. It's totally up to you and how hard you want to work. But at the same time, if your why isn't strong enough, if you don't have a deep why, knowing why you're doing this, and it has to be bigger than yourself. It has to be bigger than just serving you. If you're serving your family, you're serving God, or you're serving people just in general, that has power. That has the days you don't want to get up when things are really tough and you got to get out there and you got to face a customer that's just not very happy, or deal with the fact that you've had a down quarter and you don't know what to do about it. Like, when you have a strong why, it'll pull you through just about any how. So when it comes to, if you're on that edge, and I've been there before multiple times, when it comes to, I'm solo, when I started my current practice 15 years ago, I was independent. I came from a family company, and it was my brother, my father, and I, and we were doing design build work for 15 years as well. And things were going well until my brother and my relationship just soured, went toxic. And I had to leave. I couldn't do it anymore. So I said, you know what? We've done design build work for 15 years. There's got to be a better way to do this that I don't need all the overhead. And I used to love listening to and going to conferences with Charles Vanderkoy. I don't know if anybody of your listeners remember that guy years ago. And he always talked about multiple overhead recovery systems. And he talked about, always running your company lean and mean, he'd say, lean and mean. And I was like, man, I'd love to run a lean and mean company where I didn't have to worry about the economy. If it was up, it was good. If it was down, it was good too. Because during the up times, you saved money. And on the down times, sometimes you spent it and you just got smarter. And with that being said, when I started my current outdoor living design managed practice, I was on my own. And for the first 2.5 years, I was on my own. And I sat in a position where I'm like, I want to grow, but I can manage over $1 million in revenue a year just by myself. I'm like, that's not hard to do. And it was great rates, and I had great margins and making good money. And I'm like, so why do I want to make this more difficult? That was my mindset, right? Why do I want to make this more difficult by hiring somebody? Now I've got to train them. I don't even know what the heck I do. I'm kind of just showing up and things are working well. This is good. But if I got to train somebody, like, how am I going to find the right person? How am I going to get the training in? How am I going to know if they're doing the right thing when I'm not there? All of those questions are going through our heads, right? This is part of the entrepreneurial journey. So I ended up hiring a lady, and she came in. I'll never forget. It was right around Christmas. I had her come in, and she was a bit older than me. She's probably in her 50s, and really sweet lady. Lori, her name was. And she came in for about a week, and I could tell things just weren't great. Like, she liked it, but didn't love it, and back and forth. And it wasn't long after that, right around the first of the year, she's like, this is not working for me. I said, it's not really working for me either. And I was like, man, once again, more evidence that I probably shouldn't have somebody in the admin part of my business. I just don't have enough work for them to do. What else are they going to do when I'm not there? They just going to twiddle their thumbs and paint their nails. Like, what's going to go on when I'm not there? And I had to really get down and deep and say, why do I need somebody? And I kept thinking, because God's put it on my heart to serve at a much higher level. And I can't do that all by myself. He calls us to serve not just ourselves, but our teams and our clients. And the only way you can serve a team is by building one. Well, that requires you to get out of your own selfish way and start thinking of something bigger than just yourself. And so by the grace of God, another lady showed up, Becky, and we started talking a little bit about this position, and she jumped in, and I was kind of like, all right, let's see if this works a second time. Right. And I can say that through the years, we've learned a lot together. Now we've just celebrated 10 years together, and she now runs that company. Runs the company. But it's faith is the bigger part, right? Having a big why, knowing why you're doing it. And then at the same time, having the faith to know that things will always work out as long as you're putting your best foot forward and you're leading with your heart. And we've been through a lot of ups and downs, and it's been an amazing journey. And I wouldn't be anywhere where we are now if it wasn't for the team we've built now. And it's not a big team, it's a small team. But at the same time, it's extremely effective and efficient, and we can deliver customer experience after customer experience every day.
What's your history with burnout, and what would you say to somebody who is maybe going through their first burnout? And I've just to put some context into this one. I started my first business in 2011. And
Mhm.
so I've been burnt out, like just, want to throw my lawnmower into the lake and
Mhm.
just want to throw my podcast microphone into the Gulf of America. And like,
Yeah.
it's just, we run a business and there's these high of highs, but then there's just times where it's not glamorous. It's like any other job would seem more appealing right now than mowing grass or,
Mhm.
whatever your trade is. Have you ever been burnt out before? And how do you kind of avoid that moving forward and keep an energy about you?
That's another great question, man. You're just full of them today. I love it. Burnout. Have I experienced burnout? Yes, brother. I've experienced burnout many times, and overwhelm, stress, all of those things. Just running one company when I first started out with my father and brother, that was a lot of stress. That was a lot of overwhelm and burnout because I didn't have guardrails. We talked about that earlier in the program, right? I didn't have any of those boundaries. I just took every call whenever I could. I had my phone on my side. If a client would call for a new project, I would be in the middle of digging a pond or cleaning a pond. We used to do a lot of pond cleanings and just up to my knees in mud and sludge and all that stuff. And I'd take the call right then and there. And it's all of those things happening at one time really creates a lot, like, trying to run a company, trying to be profitable, trying to be on site, trying to make sure everything is perfect, trying to make sure the customers are all happy. All of those things over time, like snow, they accumulate into overwhelm and burnout. And there's many times that I've had the ups and the downs, the absolute tall peaks. I'll never forget the first time when I sold a project that was worth about $750,000, and I was flipping backwards because I had been dreaming and praying for that opportunity, not just for the revenue. It was for the opportunity to really, really find out what was possible, what my teams could do, what I could do as a designer and as a project manager, all new materials, all new features. I mean, it just everything in one. And it was a gigantic amount of overwhelm and stress that came out of that experience. But over the years of that, ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs, what I've learned is that if you're overwhelmed and stressed, it's most likely because you've either said yes to too many things. Your yes management sucks, because I know mine did. Or you have shiny object syndrome, which is what I had as well, where everything looked like an opportunity. So I couldn't say no to it. So I'd chase all the opportunities because you don't know if you're ever going to get another one, right? So having so many forks in the fire, feeling like I have too many yeses on the street and I couldn't cash in, I couldn't pay the bills, if you will, of those yeses. I just didn't have enough time. Then I had 2 young sons at the time and got married and all those kinds of things. So it's like, all of a sudden now you have a family that wants your time. So at the end of the day, Paul, what this really rolls down to is your ability to be really, really purposeful with your yeses, your yes management, and becoming aware of how many yeses you give out there in the streets each and every day. And once you become aware of your yes management or lack thereof, then things start to change. Once you start thinking, wait a minute here, maybe I shouldn't say yes to that. Maybe I should say yes to this. Why am I saying yes to this? Is because I've always said that? Deep down, am I just a pleaser that has a hard time with confrontation? So I just always say yes to everybody because it's easier, because it's the kind thing to do or the nice thing to do. The problem is that you keep weighting your shoulders with all of these yeses and you feel the weight of those responsibilities and they become crushing.
Mhm.
And that's where overwhelm and stress and everything get really nailed down. And over the years, I had a black belt in that, and stress and overwhelm. So much so that in chasing shiny objects that I was running 9 companies, right? My landscaping company, a bunch of real estate, consulting, and I was doing some startups with some friends, and I had teams running most of those companies, which was great. Problem is that I didn't realize that I was just chasing shiny objects, and some of those were profitable and some weren't. And the crazy part is that I was at a conference once, right down where you're at, actually, in West Palm Beach, one of Tony Robbins' events, Date with Destiny. And I was with this guy. His name was Dave. He was my partner during the event, and we started talking about things. And I was telling him about all the things I was doing. I'm running 9 companies, doing this and this, and semi-retired, and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, man, I'm telling you right now, stop it. I looked at him like, what are you talking about, Dave? He's like, I was exactly where you are now a couple of years ago. And you know what? I learned something. I learned something the hard way. And for him, he ended up being divorced and losing his family, and he all these businesses going on at one time. And he said, I had to realize one simple thought. He who chases two rabbits catches neither. And I was like, oh shit. Uh-oh. I'm like, so he says, figure out which one of these 9 things you're doing, stick with one. You'll be much more full of joy. You'll be much more full of happiness. You'll be much more centered. You'll be much more effective. And I was like, screw you, Dave. Because at the time, significance was high on my list of the human needs, right? I'm like, I want to be significant. I want to build these companies. I want to be able to serve these people. I want to do all these things. But deep down, I was really doing a lot of it for myself and my own ego. Didn't realize it at the time. But after a while, Dave's voice just sat in my head. And about 2 years later, I started to really hone in on what I was doing with my time management, right? And I started thinking like, which one of these different things that I'm doing, these 9 different businesses, which one of these are really fulfilling the mission? The bigger mission of, bringing joy and peace and love to the world and serving at the highest level, given the gifts that God's given me. Which ones of these are actually doing that? And which ones here are just for vanity? Which ones here are just for significance? So I peeled a bunch of them off and I left some businesses and I sold some stuff. And now I'm far more focused and have more time to be centered in each of these businesses. And the amount of overwhelm and stress that I released from not chasing the shiny objects anymore and chasing significance and starting to get really focused back in the grounding of the why, it shed so many of those layers of overwhelm, of stress, of procrastination, all those things. Because at the end of the day, Paul, what this really is if you can manage your yeses, my coach tells me this all the time, it's like, if you can manage your yeses and say yes to the very, very most important things, like time with God, time with your family, time with your teams, and you can say yes to those things first, become disciplined, set rituals up each and every day so you can stay growing in all the 8 core categories of life. Man, life is so much more fulfilling. Because ultimately what we want as humans is we want joy, love, fulfillment, peace. That's what we're after. And we think all these shiny objects out there in life, whether it's houses or cars or businesses or money, all those things we think are going to give us that feeling, but all it really gives us is happiness. And for some listeners are thinking, happiness sounds great. Well, happiness is that first beer at the end of the day, right? You're like, I just want to relax. I want to have this beer. It's going to make me happy and to take the stress and the overwhelm off me. But then it's 1, maybe 2, maybe 3. Next day you get up and you're like, why did I do that again? How many times am I going to do the same thing over? Not because you feel like crap the next day, or your energy's low, or your head's not straight. Happiness was fleeting, momentary. Maybe it's drugs, fleeting, momentary. Maybe it's pornography, fleeting, momentary. That's what happiness is. If you want true joy, love, and fulfillment, the only way to do that is to get centered. The only true way to do it is to get to Christ, of course. But if your target is off and you're focusing on all of those other things, thinking that's going to bring you true joy, peace, and happiness, or bring you happiness, but it's not going to bring you joy, peace, and fulfillment, it's only going to give it to you for a short amount of time. So at the end of the day, 30 years of trying every single path possible, I've only found one path that brings that consistently.
When in your story did you mention the Lord and finding out that beer and alcohol and pornography and all those things of that there's a time frame where they're fun, the beer buzz or the drug buzz. I guess I've never really got too much into drugs, but I know when it feels good when the glass of wine's hitting you just right or whatnot, or the thrill of a sexual experience. But then when all of those end, then you have to face the consequence of the pleasure of the sin. And the consequence is always way worse than whatever thrill it was in whatever sin of choice you chose. The consequence is always way worse.
Yep.
So what's kind of your story? When did you kind of come to those realizations? And I know it's a journey for everybody, but like, what were some turning points for you to kind of realize I have to, make these smarter decisions and get right with God and things of that nature?
Oh, that's another great question. That process started around age 35 for me. I'm 46 now. about 35, I started to become more aware that the things like the alcohol or weed or pornography, it just wasn't working anymore, right? It used to work when you were younger and it was fun and it would add a lot of variety to life, right? We talk about the 6 human needs. 6 human needs are certainty, uncertainty, significance, love and connection. We have also contribution and growth. Like they're all part of our needs as humans, and those vices, the alcohol, the drugs, the pornography, they kind of fit some of that when you're younger and you aren't quite as aware. And as you become older and older, and I like to think wiser, right? The more we learn, the more we realize that, all those extrinsic, those things outside of you that are quick fixes that they have, to your point, they have a lot of, they have emotional residue that's left over afterward, right? You have this, you might have had a beer or 2 or 3 or 4, whatever it is each night, because you've earned it all day long working, and you get stuck in what we call a trigger, trap, and a template. So a trigger is, oh man, had a really rough day. Beer would be amazing right now. The trap is you go and drink the beer. And then the template is you drink 5 of them, right? Because that's just what it is. Or maybe it's porn. Maybe you're like, man, I've been working so much. Wife doesn't really want to talk to me right now. Still got urges, still got needs, still got desires, still got lust. So what am I going to do? I'm going to take it out and release somewhere else. So you do that. Trigger. Okay. Rough day. Wife doesn't want me right now. Feel rejected or whatever it might be. Next thing you know, you're going into the trap, which is flipping on your phone, checking pornography, and then you know where it goes from there for the template. And that keeps coming over and over and over again. And I was getting sick and tired of the world of shame and guilt that I felt in my soul over those things, because I knew they weren't right. I knew that they weren't victimless. Pornography is one of the biggest feeders of child trafficking and human trafficking in general. When it comes down to we think it's a victimless crime because we think they want to be there. And a lot of them are drugged or forced to do that. And if you are watching that kind of stuff, you're complicit with it. And that was a big shocker for me, because I always thought, hey, if they're there doing those things, they must like it. They always seem like they're having a good time. But the reality is that the grim reality is that's not the case. And it's been since 2018 since I've watched porn. I gave it up. I struggled with that a lot when I was younger. And I realized that I was, when it came to connection, I was willing to give my soul for connection that way through porn, and as opposed to putting my heart out there for actual love, because love is scary, right? Love is something that you can get hurt and you can hurt others with, right? It's a very, you have to have a lot of faith and understand what love truly is. And if a lot of guys will just, they'll be happy with connection because love is far too difficult, or they just don't want to open up their hearts, so they struggle with empathy. But the reality is that most of the time, all our wives want is us to be intimate with them. And that's not even non-sexual. Oftentimes it's just cuddling with them or talking to them or rubbing their feet or whatever it might be. They just want that connection, that physical connection that's not sexual in nature. And for us guys, it can be different, right? For us, we're wired a little different. And for us, one may equal the other. And for women, it's not always that way. So, there's a lot of times that can lead to feelings of rejection in men and feeling their wives just don't want them. And what the wives want is love. They just don't want to be used as a toy and just used for gratification. So those kinds of things come as you get older. You start to be aware, become more aware of these things. And I've been married 20 years now. This year, I know my wife for 22. Like I said, I have 2 sons. And it's amazing what you learn along your journey. And alcohol was another thing that I'd go to a party and I'd be like, hey, I gotta have a couple of beers, because I'm not that much fun if I'm not have a couple of beers. But a couple of beers to me, I'm funny as hell. It's great. I have such a good time. And the problem is that when you're younger, you kind of bounce back much quicker when you're unaware. But when you get older and you start thinking, wait a minute here, I had these beers, this whiskey, whatever it might have been. Next day, you feel like crap. And you're like, I paid for that. I paid for this hangover. What did I get for it? What was the exchange? What was my currency exchange? And it wasn't just money at that point. It also, deep down, if you're being honest, when I was honest with myself, I was like, there's just a lot of shame and guilt in that, in those almost like not able to be in control of yourself, right? There's like these urges come up to either drink or watch pornography or smoke weed, and you just go right to them. You don't even kind of hold back. Like there's no willingness to hold back, because like, that's just what I do. And once you realize that's not what you have to do, it's what you've chosen to do. It's a pattern that you've created in your life because of a trigger, a trap, and a template. that you keep falling back in these patterns. As humans, we're creatures of pattern. We learn patterns. They can be very positive to our life, right? Positive patterns. And there's also negative patterns that take us toward the demons in ourselves. And we all have sages and saboteurs. We all have the God voice, and we all have the demon voice in our minds. And if we aren't careful, the demon voice will outshadow everything and tell us how horrible we are, how much of a joke we are, how we're not enough, how since we're not enough, we'll never be loved, that we always got to aspire to achieve. If we don't achieve stuff, then they're not worthy of love. I'm saying all these things because these are the things that go on and have gone on in my head most of my life, and I just was completely unaware of them. When I realized that we can take those ideas, those voices, and separate them from ourselves, because they aren't us. They're simply who we choose to listen to, like a radio station, if you will. It changed everything, Paul, for me. Once I look back at it now, and I'm like, I used to listen to his voices and take them as truth, the saboteurs specifically. And once I realized that was all BS, it was just an old belief system, and realized that I have the power through the grace of God to be able to set those voices in my head and to choose which ones I want to listen to and put the ones away that I don't want to listen to. It's changed everything. How I show up as a husband, as a father, as a leader, business owner, as a son. Everything changed when I realized that I'm not the voices in my head.
That's good. Yeah. Well, transformation happens when our mind gets renewed. That's the renewing of our mind. Eventually what's in our mind is going to affect our actions. So if we want our actions to change, we got to first renew our mind, and then the decisions we make are going to be following that pattern of what's changed in our mindset. So very well said. What's one action somebody listening today and they want to just take one action step that they can apply this week into their life? What's one takeaway from this conversation that you want someone to make sure they didn't miss?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that changed my life is to start listening to the inner dialogue. And for listeners out there who have never done that before, it can be scary. It can be like, I've never listened. How do we even start? What is that voice? I don't know what you're talking about. I know that was that way for me. So if I can help any of your listeners today, is to become more aware of the voices in their head and to listen and to even take notes. I mean, that's why journaling is so important, to be able to get those things out, because as men, we tend to be like islands, right? We feel like we have to do everything ourselves. We got to carry the burden, and the weight of that burden crushes most men because they have to let it out somewhere. Women do this naturally. They talk all the time and letting this pressure out, but men tend to not do that. And what I found through our men's groups and all that is that having a space where men can actually talk about what's going on inside, the stresses they feel as entrepreneurs, as fathers, as men in general, to be able to be in an environment where you can be vulnerable with other people that are going through the same thing you are, which is most people. I remember sitting in an audience, Paul, of 13,000 people at one of Tony Robbins' events. And he said, "Hey, everybody out there, who has a fear of failure?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's me. I have a fear of failure, a big one." And I'm like, "But I'm not gonna put my hand up, because if I put my hand up, others would know, and then they would judge me." So I didn't put my hand up, but I looked around. 95% of the hands went up. And I was like, wait a minute here, Paul. Wait a minute. I own that. I'm the failure. I'm the broken guy. I'm the guy that has a fear of failure. But I looked around, I'm like, 95% of people's hands were up. I'm like, maybe I don't own that. Okay. How about who else here cares a lot about what other people think about them? And I'm like, well, not put my hand up there either. 95% of the hands went up. And I'm like, wait a minute here. You're telling me all these years that I've kept this inside of myself, that I thought I was the broken one, that something was wrong with me, that no one else is like this in the world. And now I look around and 95% of people's hands, this must be a human thing, not a me thing. And if that's true, and others have figured out a way out of it, how can I figure my way out of it? How can I get out of this too? So the one thing I love is to land on your listeners is to think about the more aware that you become, and the fact that you're not broken, you're becoming. This is part of God's journey for you. It's not about isolation and being alone. It's about collaboration and connection and relationships. That's why it's so important, not just in sales, but in life in general. So anybody out there listening thinking, man, this is really hitting right now, the one thing I would say for you to do is start to write it in a journal. The things that you hear in your head when you're doing stuff and that negative voice comes out and says, look, you messed it up again. How many more times are you going to do this? Or, you know what? If anybody knew how much of an imposter you were, especially around business, you might be good at mowing lawns or building patios or whatever. But if they ever knew that you didn't know anything about business, you're just winging this thing. If you can hear those voices in your head, they're there. Everybody has them. Every human has them. We call them saboteurs. Those negative voices. Start writing them down, because you know what? Those voices, they're not you. They're a pattern that you've been running. And that pattern has been keeping you stuck where you are right now and not allowing you to get to all the goodness that God has planned for you, because you're stuck in those patterns. And the cool thing about patterns is you can scratch them and you can rewrite them, but you got to do it purposefully. And that's what I'd love to leave your listeners today, knowing that there's hope, that there's opportunity to move past those negative voices and the things that are holding you back, but you got to show up. You've got to start going into those deep, dark caves with your flashlight, shining it in there, thinking there's a monster in there. I don't want to go in there. Start shining your flashlight and realize it's nothing. There's nothing in there. Fear is a liar.
Thank you. How can people connect with you?
So the best way is through our podcast, Sales Made Simple podcast. It's for landscapers, hardscapers, and outdoor living professionals. We talk a lot about sales and some mindset and all that kind of stuff. And that's your best bet. If you go over and listen there, you'll hear a bunch of stuff that hopefully helps you in your business, lawn care and landscapers out there, to be able to be more effective as a communicator for your customers and to make sure you're speaking to the right ones and delivering the right message, or pointing them in the right direction if you're not a good fit.
Cool. I really appreciate your time and catching up.
I appreciate it, Paul. Thank you for the opportunity.